Thank you very much. Margareta, we forget always to appreciate what you do. May God bless you with good health. Everyone who listens in the world, please say amen. That Margareta should have good health, her and her husband, Dr. Leb, until 120. Amen. They should see only happiness. And everyone who is assembled here tonight with us, with all the people of Israel. Israel means all the Jews in the world. Now, if you remember, do you remember some of the things that we have discussed last week? We have discussed last week the spiritual understanding of what we call the menorah, based on what the parasha, the portion of the Torah was talking about, the candelabra that Aharon lighted. And we said that there are many things that are represented by the menorah, the candelabra, the light. And we said, for example, that the neshama, the soul within every individual, is his private menorah. That's the lamp of every individual. Your soul is the light that illuminates your heart, that illuminates your mind to look for good and to observe and to act with goodness. Which means, I'm going now to relate to it and continue on the subject, and we shall call the talk of tonight a Spark of Kabbalah. Which means for the first time we are going to touch Kabbalah. If it is possible that in the beginning it will be more or less superficial, but it might get a little bit tidy, a little bit into the depth of Kabbalah, which still is only just the surface of Kabbalah. Who are we to even discuss Kabbalah? But just to give you a satisfaction as to what is Kabbalah and what is it that Kabbalah is doing and what is the purpose of Kabbalah. So I found that this is the great opportunity to continue on the subject of last week, so that we can touch a very few foundations of Kabbalah upon which Kabbalah is based. And let me just make one point that is clear. I'm not a Kabbalist, but I do read, and I know several concepts of Kabbalah, and based on that I teach a book every day, every morning for the past month. Just for a few minutes, I mean about 15 to 20 minutes, I teach the book of Tomer Dvorah. This book was written approximately 500 years ago by the teacher of the Ari HaKadosh, the holy Ari, the master of Kabbalah, and his name was Rabbi Moshe Cordovero. Tomer Dvorah is considered as one of the greatest and the most brilliant classics of ethics, of ethical nature, of all the ethical literature of the Jewish people. Tomer Dvorah is a holy name. It's a name that is sacred in the books of philosophy as well as the philosophy of Kabbalah. It is a book that suggests many points of good conduct and good behavior, but at the same time it is all covered with concepts of Kabbalah to a degree that is practically unbelievable. Sometimes we encounter, me and my students, some pages in which we say, my God, who's going to be able to explain that? And yet God shows us ways how to explain, and we are capable of thrusting, which means going into it, and suddenly the light appears. So the book of Tomer Dvorah, if we have the time tonight, we shall take a little snack from it, if we have the time. So we said that the neshama, the soul of every individual, is his lamp. It's his menorah, which means it gives him light. And it illuminates every part of our body. Why is that? God had to do it this way, because the world was created, as we have discussed last week, on mostly evil. As the Torah says so openly, Ki yetzer lev ha'adam ra' min ne'urav. The inclination of every human being is basically evil. Why is it that God created? It means that God created evil for the purpose of evil. But evil, it means destruction of the world. Why did you bother to create the world if it is mostly evil? Well, it's a philosophical question that requires, of course, a philosophical answer. And then the Torah, if you remember, we discussed this, that Hashem brought us the story of Cain. Remember Cain? The brother of Hevel. And one day Cain got up on Hevel and he killed him. And that was the first murder in the history of mankind. The books of Kabbalah tell us that since then evil was perpetrated. Due to the act of Cain, evil now was unstoppable. It's like what happened since Adam sinned. Before the sin of Adam, it was supposed to be a different type of life. Once he sinned with Eve, you know, the story of the tree of knowledge, then what happened was that now sin has penetrated into the atmosphere of the world, and now the world is immersed with sin. All this does not make much sense if we don't understand the system of God. Because the question is, why would you bother then create the world that you will destroy ultimately? And eventually you will destroy it because of evil, since you don't like evil. And yet the books of Kabbalah say that Cain is in fact, God created him to be in charge of evil. In fact, Kabbalah calls him that he is the son of Nachash HaKadmoni, the ancient snake. That's one little concept of Kabbalah to keep in mind. Nachash HaKadmoni, the ancient snake. The snake that brought the sin to Adam. So that's representative of evil, of Satan, if you want to call it. And Cain was the physical act of Satan to perpetrate evil. Why is it that God allowed such a thing? I'm going to explain to you, and I did touch the subject last week. Because the Torah tells us that even Cain, who killed his brother, later on he regretted very much, right? And then he said the words, Gadol avoni min neso. My sin is beyond me to contain. I cannot bear the burden of my sin. Which means he did what we call today Teshuvah. He repented. And then the Torah tells us that God practically took care of him. Vaya'as Hashem ot levilti hakot oto kol motzeo. Because everyone wanted to kill Cain. Everyone wanted to harm Cain. And now that he became a better man, he became humble, and he regretted what he did and confessed his sin, God put a little sign on his forehead so no one will be able to touch him, to hurt him, to harm him in any way. All these are the stories of the Torah in the beginning of the world of the Torah, which in fact contain the secrets of the universe. Evil is there, but now evil has repented. And that gave into the atmosphere a wave of evil that repents. Because you are going to learn tonight that everything that we do creates its duplication. Why is that? Because we already have a duplication of ourselves. We have discussed this already in the past, that every human being has his own shape. In heaven, you have your own face right there. It's like the prototype is there, and we are now the machines. But when we die, which means when we pass from this world and we go back home, The body doesn't go back home. The body goes to the earth. But the real person is in his neshama, the feelings, everything. But what is the neshama? We already said that it does not mean that it is a little puff of smoke or something, like people like to imagine what is the meaning of neshama. Like I read in some books of science that they wanted to film, at the time of the death of someone, they wanted to film that which is supposed to come out from the body, and they couldn't film anything. So if it says that we are the first thing that people who die will see their parents, will see their friends who died before them, the people will come to welcome them, people will come to address them, how are they going to recognize them? And the dead person himself, the one who just passed away, how is he going to recognize his relatives if all we talk here is about neshamot, souls? Fair question or not? The answer is, according to the Zohar HaKadosh, the Holy Zohar, the master of book of Kabbalah, it says that we have a duplication there. In fact, the same shape that we have exactly here is the shape that we have up there, the same eyes, the same colors, the same everything, except that it is a different form of energy. Which means we are not going to have to go to the bathroom there, or we are not going to bleed or something, but the shape is right there. And that shape is not just a reflection of a mirror, it's in fact a source of life that is endless. With an intensity, which means that every emotion that we have is already intensified by billions of times when we talk about a heavenly us, a heavenly us, a heavenly you. So, because of that, because we have such a duplication, so whatever we do here immediately duplicates itself elsewhere in heaven. That's why people have to be careful not to sin too much. Why? Because when you sin, you immediately duplicate it, you cannot run away from it. One day it will haunt you. One day up in heaven it's going to come and persecute you. Like it says in the Talmud, that if a person desecrates Shabbat, let's say he comes on Shabbat, he doesn't care about Shabbat, so he tears up, let's say, a branch from a tree, which is forbidden to do on Shabbat. So the Talmud tells us that at that time, the branch will not scream, will not say anything, will not even say I. But when he goes to heaven, that same branch is going to come and scream at him, what have you done to me? What have you done to me? The same thing it says about the walls. Like it says in the book of Iyov, Even mikir tizak. We think that the walls have no eyes or have no ears. We are going to find, here of course not, because everything is limited in this world. But the duplication of that wall is going to scream to heaven then, and every single brick, every single stone of that wall is going to start and screaming, saying what they saw this human being was doing. Unless if we do what we call Teshuvah. Because when we do Teshuvah, what is the great deal of Teshuvah? The fantastic benefit of Teshuvah is that you practically change identity. You are not the same person. So even the duplication changes totally. And the sins are not yours anymore. That's the reason why our sages said that if you do Teshuvah of love, which means not out of fear of pressure or something, but you do it out of recognition, out of love, then even your past sins are going to become good deeds. So you see what have we learned now? That there is such a thing, that evil can be reversed to become good. And our sages said that b'makom sheba'alei teshuvah omdim en tzadikim gmurim yecholim la'amod, which means people who do teshuvah properly. Not everyone that you think is religious is really religious or Baal Teshuvah, but a one who is honestly, who has returned again to his heritage honestly, he is on a higher level than even the tzaddik, than even the righteous man. He is better than him. I mean, the Baal Teshuvah is better than him. How could this be? The answer is, what's better? Good that is good, or evil that has become good? Our sages teach us that Hashem is interested much more in evil that becomes good, much more than good that is good. A tzaddik, from the day he was born, he is a tzaddik. He grew up in a very religious house. All he learned was Torah all his life. He was not really, doesn't have much experience with the sins in the world. So therefore he is considered as a tzaddik, a person who's good. Of course he has his share in the world to come, no question about it. But there was no big challenge about him. And God is looking for a challenge. I want you to take evil and to crush it and to bring it back into what we call good. And that's the reason why God created this world. And that's the reason why God created evil. It's not him who created. He created the notion of evil, but he gave it into the hands of Satan, from which we come to Cain. And we asked how come Cain came to be if he was to be a murderer? Because God was interested in a Cain. In the eyes of God, Cain today is sitting on a throne. Why? Because he was the first one who has reversed the power of evil to become a power of good. He became good. And that's exactly what God wants more than anything else. And that's the reason why God created the world. Which means that we come here to this world. Why are we being thrown into this world? Why do we are born here? We come from somewhere. You have to know. We don't come just from Shtuyot. We come from somewhere. We come from home. We come from a world that is ours, but we are not entitled to it until we gain possession on it. Until we acquire it. Because it's not good to have something that benefits you and you have done nothing in order to make an acquisition on it. You understand this? It's called in the work of Kabbalah, it's considered lechem busha, nahma de kisufa, bread of shame. When someone has great benefit from something that he did not earn, he does not feel happy. When do you feel an intense happiness? Only when you benefit from something that you have worked for, that you have achieved. Then you are happy. But if someone gives you a piece of bread as a gift, or as a charity, you know it's only a charity. And nobody is happy with charity. You understand that? So therefore, the souls up there, they were having a tremendous pleasure. And God says, for what? Have you done something to earn that great bliss of pleasure? Go to this world. Make sure you do the right thing and earn your ticket back to my home with a lot of possibility to acquire much more than what you had before. And more in heaven means an empire. This is one of the topics of Kabbalah. That's one of the things that Kabbalah discusses. The relationship between the physicality of the human being and his spirituality. That there is a tremendous connection between our physicality and spirituality. And we are going to find out that in fact, an individual is much more spiritual than physical. Even though we are, of course, we are solely physical. Wherever you touch, it's physical. But if we ponder into the spirituality of every individual, we will find that he, in fact, is much more spiritual than physical. One thing we have to keep in mind, though, that God did not create things that are impossible for us. What did we say before? That now our mission is to take evil and to bring it back to its natural good. Right? Apparently it sounds impossible. But that's not true, because God has invested in us a lot of capabilities. One potential that He gave us is to be able to reverse the course of evil, to to make it come back to good. And that's the reason, as we said before, why God created Satan. And by the way, as we have mentioned last week, even Satan himself is an agent of God. He wants us to do evil, but in fact, he prays that we shouldn't listen to him. Because he is a malach, in fact. Satan is an angel of God, whose mission is quite not fair, to make us do evil, to make us do bad. If we don't listen to him, the Satan himself is happy. Because even though apparently his mission did not succeed, but that's in fact what he wants. So, and all this why? Because man, the individual person, is what we call ha-menorah ha-tehorah, the pure candelabra. As it says in the book of King Solomon, Ner Hashem Nishmat Adam, the candle of God is the soul of man. And the man himself is the foundation of that light, if he does his mission in this world. If you do what is good, then you are considered like if you are a menorah, like if you are a candelabra. And that's the reason why a human being, in the eyes of halakha, is extremely important. It's not like by the Islamic religion where they kill by the tons, where they kill people by the buckets. But in the eyes of the Jewish people, every life. Look, I mean, don't you see how much the state of Israel, although secular, what they are doing because of one soldier that we have in the hands of Hamas, Gilad Shalit. Show me one nation, one country in the world that is going to invest so much energy for one soldier that is prisoner so many years already in the hands of those murderers. The Jewish people is very special. So what you asked before, doctor, if we can compare a futuristic state of Israel based on halakha to an Islamic state based on their sharia, nothing to compare. Why? Because life in our eyes is the most sacred thing that there is. And after the little introduction which I gave you tonight, you will understand why it is so precious, why life is so precious. Because life is not just a piece of meat. Life is something that is eternal. And that's the reason that our sages say in the Talmud, in Masechet Shabbat on page Lamed, it says there that even though we are not allowed to desecrate Shabbat, but if it is for the purpose to save a human life, go ahead and desecrate Shabbat. The Talmud says on that page, Chalel Shabbat achat v'kabeh haner hana'asa al yedei adam, we allow you to desecrate one Shabbat, even though you are practically extinguishing a candle that is made by men. In other words, by desecrating Shabbat, you are practically extinguishing one candle. Every mitzvah is a candle that we light. Whenever you perform one mitzvah, any mitzvah, even when you, let's say you give honor to your father and mother, every time you listen to them and every time you respond to them with love and respect, another candle is being lighted in heaven. Whenever you put tefillin, every day that we put tefillin, a candle is being lighted in heaven. So, as it says, Kiner mitzvah veTorah or. One mitzvah is another candle. So, but the Torah is light, of course. The Torah is the teacher of all the mitzvot, the way we should do them, and so forth. And that's why we have to learn the Torah for the purpose to be able to know how to do practically and properly every single mitzvah. Every mitzvah that you do, one candle is lighting forever. And now, if you are going to allow someone to desecrate Shabbat, it means one candle is going to be puffed away. It's going to be extinguished. So how can we allow such a thing? So the Talmud says, go ahead. If it is for the purpose to save a human life, desecrate Shabbat, even though it means extinguishing one candle of men. But at the same time, you are practically Tov milatet lenishmato shel adam lichbot. It's better than let the soul of a human being to be extinguished. It's better to extinguish a candle of God, that is Shabbat, than to extinguish the life of a person. You understand? To extinguish the light, which means the neshama of a person. Based on this, our sages said, Pikuach nefesh doche hakol. When it comes to save a life, every mitzvah is put aside. So you see how much we respect human life in the eyes of halakha, in the eyes of the Torah. No question about it. So there is no way we can compare chas v'shalom, our Torah, to theirs. Even though their Torah, if you could call it Torah, which is called Sharia, the laws of their of the Islam, even though most of it was taken from the Bible, and a lot was taken even from the Talmud. You'll be surprised to hear that. But since it is done in the wrong way, it has nothing, no comparison at all to what we hold as the Torah, which is the real book of the world. If you don't believe it now, you will believe it one day soon, hopefully. So the Talmud says in Masechet Shabbat on page 151, the Shabbat may be desecrated for a living infant of a day. Did you hear this? A baby that is just born. Just one day. He is already entitled to his life to the point that you are already allowed to desecrate Shabbat if it means to save him. That's the reason why we allow for the first 3 days when the woman gives birth to the child, in case, of course, if it is possible to avoid that. That's the best. Like today, in modern days, there is no need for that. But to even warm water on the fire, to have warm water for the baby on Shabbat. And of course, today, since we have better ways how to do it, there is no such a thing. But at a certain time, in ancient times, it was okay. Why? Because it means the life of a child. The life of a baby, an infant of 1 day. And the Talmud says, and you cannot desecrate Shabbat for a dead body, even if it means that the dead body is the body of King David himself. Which means if King David, you know what, this is a true story as brought in the Talmud. In the Talmud we find that King David, when he died right there in his garden. And that's not nice to leave the corpse of a king outside, thrown on the dirt. King Solomon, his son, when he saw that, he had a big problem. What to do? He couldn't touch his father's body because it's muktzeh. It's one of the forbidden things to touch something like this on Shabbat. And therefore his father had to stay outside, thrown like a dog. Which brought King Solomon to say a very great statement. Tov, hakelev achai, mina aryeh hamet. Better to be a living dog than to be a lion that's dead. And you see, the lion is of course the king. But all this comes to teach us one thing. As long as you are alive, there is nothing that will stop the possibility of giving you the possibility of this life. Even when a person is about to die. I mean, he is already in that process of dying. But as long as he is not dead yet, you're allowed to do everything that's possibly giving him the possibility of living 1 more minute. Even if it means by that to desecrate Shabbat. So when it comes to human life, we don't consider anything. No Torah, no nothing. Because it is with the permission of the Torah, of course. And that's a great potential that we find invested in men. And why is that? Because of the potential that has been given to men to render evil to good. For that, human life is the most precious thing that there is in all the things that exist in the world. If you remember, last week we discussed that Shabbat itself is the spiritual power of this world, of all the days of the week. In fact, there is an indication in the Holy Scriptures, in the Holy Scripts of Kabbalah, that in fact, if it was not for Shabbat, there would be no life for the 6 days of the week. The 6 days of the week absorb their life, their existence from Shabbat. Why is that? It is possible that if you remember the beginning of the lecture, you would tell me, because Shabbat has a duplication up there. So up there is also what we call Shabbat. We did discuss this last week. That Shabbat exists in heaven, and that is the duplication of our Shabbat. So we understand that Shabbat itself is a living entity. You understand that? And that's why it says in a Midrash. It says in a Midrash, Amar Rabbi Shimon Chassid, בעולם הזה אדם עוקר תאנה בשבת והתאנה שותקת. As I have said before, if you uproot a fig on Shabbat, the fig will be quiet here in this world. But in heaven, בעולם הבא, התאנה תזעק, the fig is going to scream, היום Shabbat, what are you doing? Today is Shabbat. Therefore, one has to be very careful when it comes to Shabbat. Even though we already showed you that human life is even more sacred than Shabbat. But let's say human life is not involved. We have to come back again to understand that Shabbat is the greatest force of spirituality that we have in this physical world. Because that's the day which connects us with spirituality. I mean, anybody would understand what I am saying. Everybody must admit that for 6 days we are working. Come Shabbat we feel something else. We already discussed this in the past many times. So Shabbat is the connection that we have with whatever spirituality we have. No question about it. But because of that, we have to be careful on Shabbat also about things that are spiritual. Let me ask you a question. Let's say we have a body, right? In our body, it's physical. Do we have anything spiritual? And then don't say neshama. The neshama is spiritual, but it's inside. We don't know about the neshama. The soul is inside. What else is spiritual in us that is evident? Again, what is it that is spiritual in every human being? That is spiritual in every human being, that is evident, that everybody knows and everybody sees and everybody hears. Very simple. Speech. That is a great power that we have. I mean, how do we talk? I mean, who said that by moving your lips you'll be able to emit sounds and verses and words? Who says that you are capable of formulating words of wisdom from a mouth that's moving? I mean, the mouth of an animal, it's moving also, but it does not have the power of speech. But human beings have. And that's one indication that God has invested in us a lot of spirituality. That our sages say that the gift of speech is a scepter of God. That God gave us His scepter as a gift. And our sages said, Man de nafach midile kanafach, which means, how did He give us the power of speech? Uri, how did He give us the power of speech? The Torah tells us, He breathed into us His own breathing. After God finished creating the shape of man, then He went on His nostrils and He breathed into His nostrils. That's what God did. And the Torah tells us in the Targum Onkelos, Vayhi leruach memalela. When Adam woke up, he was capable of speaking. A gift of all gifts. And it was given by God Himself. Now, there is a rule that the Talmud says, Man de nafach, anyone who breathes into anything, what do you breathe? Your air that comes from where? From your inside. If God breathed into the nostrils of man the power of speech, what did He breathe into him? The breath of God. God's breath Himself. Because when you breathe into something, what comes out of your mouth is something that is inside you. Same thing with God. So imagine that we have in us what we have in a human being. We have practically the breath of God. That's the speech. And if I tell you that because of that, we have to be very careful how we talk and what we say and how we say it. People, now you have to admit, if you believe in what we said, then you have to admit that we have to be very careful how we talk. Hence, the laws of Lashon Hara, the laws of evil gossip. People, unfortunately, don't control their mouths, when they should know that they should know how to control their mouth much more than their body. Even though, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this in the open, but there is a great connection between another part of the body that relates to the great power of speech that we have. You are not going to believe it. It's known in the work of Kabbalah as well as in the Talmud, Brit HaMa'or or Brit HaLashon. The covenant of the tongue, which is the speech, and the covenant of the Brit, the circumcision, the organ. Our sages said that if one does not control his tongue, it means that he does not control himself down there, which means he commits anything he wants, when he should know also that that part, which is the organ of a man, which is shared with the woman, of course, to produce life, is the holiest part of the human body. In the work of Kabbalah, I did discuss the fact that we have 10 emanations. It's called the 10 Sefirot. If you read books, you probably have encountered the notion, the concept of Sefirot. There are 10 emanations by which Hashem created the world. The top is the Keter, the crown. And then you have the shoulders. Chokhmah, on the right is the wisdom. On the left it's Bina, intellect. Then you have the torso, which is Chesed, kindness. That's the build, that's how the world is built, on kindness. Olam Chesed Ibane. Then you have, go down even further, it's the Malchut. The Malchut is the royalty of God, even though it is low, but it is Din. Din means it's a harsh justice, because what comes from the king is always straight. The king does not need compassion, right? So there is no, by the king there is no such a thing as the notion of Rachamim. I mean, he does have pity, but he himself has to give the law according to the face of the law. And the face of the law is known in Kabbalah as Din. Those are two concepts of Kabbalah, Midat Din and Midat Rachamim. When you say Elokim, that's the name of God, but it represents, it symbolizes Din, harsh measure of justice. That's straight truth. No fluctuations. But when you say Amonai, Yud Ke Vav Ke, it represents Rachamim, compassion. Compassion is not a concept of brilliance. Compassion is inferior to justice. Justice doesn't know compassion. The truth is, you make a mistake, you have to pay. But compassion says, well, I'm going to forgive today. Tomorrow, do your best. You understand what I'm saying? That's called the measure of compassion. God brought those two forces, harsh judgment and compassion, Din and Rachamim, and He brought them together so that the world will be able to survive. Because if it was based only on Elokim, which means on justice, it will never be able to survive, because people are basically evil. I mean, they are negative in the beginning. There's much more to say about this. I don't want to take much time, even though you have to know that this is the body of Halakha. So I was telling you about the 10 Sefirot. So you have the Malchut, which is royalty, that's Din. And then you go even lower, and the lowest is, I'm jumping now, I'm skipping some of them. You go directly to the lowest, and the lowest is the Yesod, the foundation, and that's the place of the Brit, the place where we do circumcision, Brit Milah. That part, although the lowest, it's the most sacred part of the human being. What is then the job of Satan? As you know, every force, of sanctity in this world was immediately attacked by the forces of tum'ah, of impurity. So are you watching what I'm saying? When God created this world, He also gave great power to Satan. And Satan mobilized a tremendous army, an army of evil. He has many servants. Satan has many, many employees and servants. And one of them could be anything that people like. I mean, television could be also something that, and yet could be used for good also. But it is used much more. I mean, pornography and things like this. Or even movies. Or anything in life today, ba'avonot harabim, unfortunately, while it could be very good, but at the same time it is used mostly by people to corrupt them even more. That's the way Satan is. Because whatever God creates that is good, immediately Satan's mission is to produce something equivalent or even more superior in evil. So now, since the most sacred, the most holy part of the human body is that part which I mentioned before, what should be then the job of Satan? Is of course to bring his forces on it. And that's how we have what we call another concept in Kabbalah. If you read books, you probably encounter the word kelipot. Kelipot is a concept of Kabbalah that represents the forces of tum'ah, of impurity. Those are the forces that if they are not controlled, they will dominate the world. They will dominate human being, your soul, everything. The problem is that with everything that is good and sacred, the forces of kelipot come and they attach themselves to it. That's the reason why we have to learn Torah, because the Torah is a purifier, and that's how it gets rid of the forces of tum'ah. Watch the world. Today, the most cardinal sins that occur in the world is with that part of the body. Why is it when the beginning of life, when we start our career as a human being, the first thing that we do is Brit Milah, circumcision, right? And it is the most sacred law in the eyes of Judaism that even non-religious Jews that do it, even though it is practical surgery, that apparently you have to be crazy to do it. How the Jewish people is nuts. I mean, why is it here is a cherished possession, that baby. They waited for that baby for such a long time. And finally, when they have him sparkling with life and has no problems at all healthy, you have to put him through the sword and cut a piece of his flesh. What are we, a nation of nuts? I tell you the truth, if we really were a nation of crazies, by now we would have understood that, right? By now we would, probably the Jewish people with the progress of time, we would have already understood that we were barbars, and therefore we would stop this. And yet the Jewish people is going on, they don't want to give up this mitzvah. Not only that, it's better than Shabbat. Shabbat, if you are religious, you keep Shabbat. You are not religious, you don't keep Shabbat. If you are religious, you keep kosher. You are not religious, you don't keep kosher. But when it comes to Brit Milah, circumcision, religious or not, every Jew does it. That's a miracle, by the way. It's a miracle. It's a miracle because of Eliyahu and Navi and Abraham, Yitzchak and Yaakov, that because of this mitzvah, they could come and face God and say to God, please God, don't punish our people. Your children are great. Look what they are doing. And I mean, they are crazy. It is true. They are bad and they are anything you want. But see what they do to their little child for you. And Hashem said, Wallah, you're really right. I don't know what to do. That's amazing. And that's why I was telling you before that an amazing philosophy. Our sages said that God is making us do Brit Milah. Brit means the covenant of the circumcision, which means it's a pact that we have done with God. We do this, we have a card of identity that you are Jewish. Like it says in the Zohar HaKadosh, when we go there, how are we going to show that we are Jewish? Immediately Eliyahu there, let me see. Oh, you're Jewish, come in. So, there is one thing that he also gave us as a gift that is also a covenant. So in the work of Kabbalah it's called Brit HaLashon and Brit HaMa'or. Brit HaMa'or is the circumcision. Brit HaLashon is the tongue, the power of speech that we have. And somehow, philosophically talking, the Kabbalah says, if you do not control your mouth, it means you don't control yourself down there also. If a person knows what to say, and what to say is always good, you could be sure that he has control over himself also in that part which causes so much corruption in the world. You know how much evil there is in the world today because of that little part of the body? I mean, forgive me for telling you those things tonight. Well, what can I say? Somebody has to talk about those things. Somebody has to say something about it. The truth is that people are not careful with their mouth. I mean, what is the proof that this generation is the worst generation in the desecration of that organ, of that part of the body? What is the proof that today is the worst? Watch how people talk today. Do you know that in no generation before there was no such a thing? In the lexicon of the nations, of all the countries, you could not find in any of the ancient books words that today they say. I cannot say that in the, you know, words that people say. Things, I'm sorry, I cannot say that. But they know, that's all you hear today. The foul expression of the mouth. Today, if the more foul it is, the more successful you are in college or in public school. But if you speak decently and you talk good things, people, they don't associate with you. You are nuts. So you understand that because the generation is so bad down there, that's why the generation is so bad in the gift of God, that is the speech that He gave us. On Shabbat, which we said before, is a day of spirituality. And everyone must admit to this. Whether you like it or not, Shabbat is the day which comes upon us with at least a little bit of spirituality. I mean, even the Jew that is the farthest Jew understand that Shabbat has some air of spirituality. That's the day when Jews realize that there is a God. And that's the connection with that we have with spirituality. That's the reason why on Shabbat we have to be very careful with the spiritual things that we have. So what is the spiritual things that we have? Speech. People have to be very careful how they talk on Shabbat. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be careful how to talk on Friday or on Wednesday or Sunday. Of course you have to be careful how you speak every day. But on Shabbat, double. The carefulness should be double on Shabbat, because speech is spiritual, Shabbat is spiritual, the duplication becomes intensive, and then what you do cannot be undone. And that's why in some places in the Talmud we find in the Talmud in Masechet Shabbat, in Talmud Yerushalmi, where in chapter 15, we find that Rabbi Avhu used to say, do not talk on Shabbat. Don't speak on Shabbat. You find this surprising? I remember Jews who never said a word on Shabbat. I had him one of them, for his zechut or his soul, I will mention this, somebody by the name Shimon Atar. I remember him, he passed away a long time ago. He lived here in Queens, in Forest Hills. He had a habit that he learned. He was not he was a religious man, I'm not saying no, but he was not a Torah scholar. He was, a simple Jew. But he had one habit that he acquired from his parents, not to talk on Shabbat. I used to come to him, Shimon, come on, Shimon. I remember, I think my grandmother also didn't speak much on Shabbat. At least if they said anything, it was very much under control and they were very careful. Let alone Lashon Hara, let alone to speak gossip. And yet so many people, they use Shabbat for more gossip. That is true. Because they have nothing else to do. They sit down and talk about this one and this one and this one, and they don't know what they are doing. Unfortunately, what they are producing there is a real catastrophe in heaven. That is, of course, if you believe. Because everything that we say is recorded. You have to understand that. And even if you say something that has no value, it is recorded. Everything is recorded. What can I tell you, my friends? You know that because of Shabbat, we say that Shabbat is a power of spirituality. Do you believe in that? I'm telling you, Shabbat, I don't have to convince you, Shabbat is a demonstration of spirituality. You know that the Mekubalim, the Kabbalists in Israel, in Eretz Israel, in Tzfat, in Tzafet, every Friday afternoon, they would all wear white garments and go outside to the mountains to welcome the coming of Shabbat. It's called Bo'ikala, come here, Princess Shabbat. It was a very, very serious act of Kabbalah. We have no notion of that because we are not Kabbalists, but the Kabbalists, they used to do that. So they knew what they were talking about. They knew that Shabbat is coming, which means there is a living entity. There is an air that's coming that is different than the rest of the days of the week. You understand that? Shabbat is our life. Shabbat is our crown. Shabbat is our blood. If we don't keep Shabbat, unless if we undo what we did, we are not Jews. And not to be Jews is not to be, what can I say? Is not to be a Jew is not to be alive in the word, in the vernacular of our Chachamim, of our sages. You know that because of Shabbat, many people did Teshuvah. I know people who became more religious just because of Shabbat. They had no intention to become religious, but let's say because somebody died in the family, so they came to the synagogues, they saw what's happening, so they became, now they started with Kiddush, they started to do Kiddush, they like it, they sit with the family, they see that there is a different air, they start coming to the synagogue, they get used to coming to the synagogue, they feel even more, and so forth and so forth. During the repast of Shabbat, they sing and the singing, then he gets the idea that Shabbat, you are practically a different human being. You are a king. On Shabbat, we are kings. And the person who is intelligent should know that he's losing a lot by not keeping Shabbat. But one other thing that he had to remember, if he knows, that he should know that if he does not keep Shabbat, the duplication of Shabbat is going to take care of him right there. What is he going to do up there after 100 years or 120? So because of Shabbat, people made Teshuvah. Shabbat had a double power than the other days of the week. And on Shabbat, there was more opportunity for people to come back b'teshuvah. That's all it takes is a beginning. Little by little, people change and they become at least normally religious. I mean, the minimum, the basic minimum that is required by every Jew. I'll tell you a little story that happened very recently in Bnei Brak, in Israel. A taxi driver. He was, unfortunately, on Shabbat, you know how he was on the proximity of Bnei Brak. He was running and then he killed a child. It was not his fault. The child suddenly went on the street and he was killed. It was proven that it was not his fault. I'm sorry, did I say killed the child? Yes, he killed the child, unfortunately. The man, the taxi driver, even though he was not religious at all, the Jew is a Jew. For him to bear the burden of having killed a Jewish child with peot and everything, he couldn't live with himself. First he went to the family. He was crying with them. Even though it was proven already that it's not his fault, really. It was the fault of the child. But he came to them and he said to them, please, ask me anything. I'm willing to do anything for you. I killed your child. I'm willing to do anything for you. Use me. The parents said to him, all we want you to do is one thing. Because of you didn't keep Shabbat, you killed the child, right? He wouldn't have driven a car if he were a Shomer Shabbat. So promise us to be a Shomer Shabbat. He was suddenly overtaken by that. He expected them to say, pay us money, give us this, come to work for us for free, something. Instead they asked him, start being Shomer Shabbat. He said this gave him such an inspiration that not only he became a Shomer Shabbat, he became a very religious man since then. A true story that happened very recently. So that's the power of Shabbat. Shabbat itself has given him that power to be able to change. And remember, that's the reason why we come to this world, to make changes. Why? Because evil is number one in the world. Do you know? The Talmud in Masechet Sanhedrin says that that's the reason why it says in the Torah, La petach chatat rovetz. Satan is waiting at you at the opening of the womb of your mother. When you are, as soon as you come out to this world, Satan is already as big as he is ready for you. And yet the child has no power of control, right? Which means he has to grow first. So who is considered who is older, more experienced than the child himself? Who is more experienced than him? Satan, of course. Since Satan, at the birth of the child, he is already very big and old. King Solomon calls it that Satan is Melech Zaken Uchsil. He is a king, he is an old man, and he is a fool. But that's not what it means. It means he is a king because Satan could practically control every part of your body. Your hands, your legs, your head, everything could be under the control of Satan to do practically whatever he wants. So he is a king. He is considered an old man. Why? Because when we are born and we are still nothing, a little baby, he is already a grown up. He has much more experience than all of us, so he is old. And number three, kesil. In Hebrew, plain Hebrew, it means a fool. But it means, the true meaning of that is that he causes us to be fools. Like the Talmud says, "En adam over avera ad shechnesa bo ruach shtut." One does not conduct himself with sins unless if he lost his mind. That's what the Talmud says. If you have any respect for the Chachamim, then you know that they were not throwing statements just for nothing. If they said that anyone who sins, he does not sin until he loses his mind. Which means at the time when we sin, we have no mind. It means that when you have no control over your mind, you don't have a brain. At that time, you have lost your mind. So, who caused this? The master of foolishness. That's Satan himself. So you see, that's the problem. The problem is that Satan is so much older than us, and yet God wants us to live in a world like this for one purpose, as we said before. For the purpose to reverse evil and to make it good. For that he is willing even to take a big part of our life, as sinful as it is, for the sake of Teshuvah. Would you like me to continue on that vein? It's already 10:15. But did you ever ask yourself a question, why is it that we always welcome Shabbat with the candles? Now you should be able to understand. Why do we light candles for Shabbat? What's candles doing for Shabbat? It means that somebody behind us is doing the cheshbon, the calculation. We welcome Shabbat because Shabbat is the menorah, that's the lamp of the week. That's the day which enlightens our soul. That's the day in which we are connected with more spirituality than physicality, than even food that we eat. If you know how to observe and how to think and how to evaluate the taste, you know that on Shabbat it's more tasty. That's the taste of spirituality, as we have discussed in the past. That's the reason why we light the candle, because we understand that Shabbat is a menorah, a candelabra of light. even though we call the lecture of tonight a Spark of Kabbalah, but we really didn't even touch a glimpse of it. Is it possible that next time we will continue to give satisfaction to the people to know what is Kabbalah? Even though, how much can we offer? We don't have much to offer in Kabbalah. But whatever we have could satisfy people and their knowledge to see, because people are curious. What is Kabbalah? What's the purpose of Kabbalah? I mean, everybody now today, Kabbalah, you see, even Madonna is becoming a Kabbalist. Her name suddenly is Esther, Madonna. Whenever I say Madonna, I remember the word din. Madonna, din. And din has to do with Kabbalah. That's, as we said tonight, a harsh judgment. In this, it's a harsh judgment for the Jewish people if Madonna will become a student of Kabbalah, which is a shame, by the way. And but the point is that doesn't mean that we have to be happy that somebody from the outside has to become a student of Kabbalah. A student of Kabbalah must know one thing: the purity of the body before the purity of the soul. The soul will become pure only with the purity of the body. And Madame Madonna, if you want the purity of the soul, first you have to purify your body. There is no Kabbalah for people who do not think about, number one, the sacredness of their body. And that's one message that we are allowed here to give you tonight. If you wish, we can continue on that spirit next week. It's probably we will use again the book of Tomer Deborah, from which some of the words that I said tonight come from there. And have a very good night. Okay, Marina.
On the Shabbat, Friday night, when we do the Kiddush, we're standing.
Yes.
Saturday daytime, we're sitting. Why is that?
So, what you are asking is very good question that the Shulchan Aruch discusses. The book of Jewish Code, the Jewish law, says. What is before I answer, did you understand the question? Why is it that in the Kiddush of Friday night we stand? And the Kiddush of Saturday morning, we sit. The answer, even though it has other branches, but the plain answer that you should know is this. What is the difference between the Kiddush of the night and the Kiddush of the morning? Of course, you would tell me, we stand, we sit. That's not the difference. The difference is, the Kiddush of the night is considered to be Kiddusha Rabbah. And the Kiddush of the morning is considered to be Kiddusha Zuta. In Aramaic, Zuta means small. In Aramaic, Rabbah means big, like Shemeh Rabbah, Shmo HaGadol. So now we understand that Friday night, the Kiddush is big, which means the most important Kiddush. The Kiddush of Friday night is the Kiddush, it's a mitzvah aseh mideoraita. It's a mitzvah from the Torah. The Kiddush of the morning is not from the Torah. It's an addition by the sages, because it has been sanctified already. Why is it that Friday night has the privilege of having the most important Kiddush? Because that's when we usher in Shabbat. When else can you usher in Shabbat by reciting the Kiddush, if not on Friday night? That's how we show the indication that Shabbat begins in the night. But if you say Kiddush only in the morning when Shabbat was already last night, for which purpose do you say Kiddush? Kiddush is to usher in Shabbat, to invite Shabbat in. Mekadesh is lehazmin, to invite. So when do you do that? Of course, Friday night. That's the time when you observe the mitzvah of the Torah of Kiddush, which is represented by one of the 10 commandments, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat lekadesho. Zachor is not only remember, it means lizkor bapeh. The sages say, lizkor bapeh, which means you have to recite something. That's why we recite the Kiddush Friday night, and thus we fulfill the mitzvah of the Torah of sanctifying Shabbat. This has to be done only when you bring in the Shabbat. That means Friday night. That's why it's called Kiddush Rabbah. That's why we stand. We stand because the Shekhinah is coming. When the king is coming, everybody stands. When the princess is coming, everybody stands. In Shabbat, it's considered to be Kalla, the bride of the Jewish people. We stand for her. When the bride comes on the night of the wedding, you know what happens? Let's say when she appears for the chuppah, everybody stands. Why? In fact, it's not for her, it's for the Shekhinah that comes with her. In the morning, in fact, this was only an additional mitzvah that our sages added, even though it was not really required by the Torah. But the sages have requested that we should repeat again the Kiddush of the morning. That's why we sit. Why? It's not anymore to welcome the Shekhinah. The Shekhinah has arrived already, and that's the reason. Any other question?
Yes.
Yes?
Why when you drink wine you have to sit down?
Well, I tell you, you are talking about Pesach rather, right? No. On Pesach, that's when you sit down to drink. Because Friday night you don't drink the whole, only the guy who says the Kiddush, if he can, he drinks most of it, which is the Rov. But the truth, so you are asking why is it that on Pesach, for example, which is the most normal time when we drink, when everybody drinks a whole cup, why do we sit? The answer is very simple.
But on Shabbat you're also sitting.
Okay, if you are going to drink the whole cup, you are advised to sit. And why is that? Because if you stand while drinking, or if you drink while standing, you are endangering your life. As the Rambam writes in the book of Hilchot Deot. So you have to be careful when you drink. By the way, this is a good advice. Even when you drink water, if you drink a cup of water, sit down. It's more healthy for your body. This I heard distinctly from Rabbi Avigdor Miller, alav shalom. So you understand that even drinking, why? When you drink while standing, there is always a danger that it might pass through the wrong place. So wine also, if you sit, that's why we sit after we say the Kiddush the night of Pesach. And by the way, the night of Pesach, we have an additional reason. What is the additional reason? No, okay, that's a good reason. But there is a more actual reason on Pesach that has to do with the mitzvot of the night of the Seder. You know, how do you drink the night of Pesach? You have to go like this. That's one of the mitzvot of the Seder. And how can you go like this if you don't sit? So, but basically the reason is because it's not healthy to drink while. Is the doctor in agreement with me or not? No, don't you agree with that? Believe me, our sages said that when you drink, of course it's not required by halakha, but nevertheless it is required by the good sages of many, many generations, that one, even though he doesn't have to, but it's better, he is advised, whenever you drink a cup of water, unless if it is only one little portion, but if you drink a whole glass of water, sit down. It's healthier. Any question? Did you hear this question? The question is, Reuven is asking, if as soon as you light the candle, is it already Shabbat for you or not? I could go for another hour for this question, but I'll tell you very quickly. The answer is yes and no. Yes, if you have already in your mind made a condition that as soon as I light is Shabbat, then it's true. After that you cannot do anything, which is in most cases regarding the woman. Unless, let's say, she still is very busy, and the time of Shabbat has come for the lighting, but she needs still to run here and there, we allow her to make a condition that I am not accepting Shabbat now until it starts. Of course, this on condition that she lights before the time. Usually we light before the time. We light 18 minutes before the time. So that's why you still have 18 minutes that you could use in case of emergency, if it is extremely necessary. Otherwise, you must accept Shabbat 18 minutes before the time. So that's why we say, and by the way, that's the reason, the difference between Ashkenazim and Sephardim, that the Sephardim, when you first light, Ben Ish Chai, there are different minhagim on that. The first light, and then you cover your eyes, and then you say the bracha. The others say vice versa. You say the bracha, and then you light the candles. Why is it? Because some have the opinion that if you say the bracha להדליק נר של שבת, it's already Shabbat, how can you light? You understand? Even though it's not acceptable by us, but nevertheless, if it is bothering you, the lights of Shabbat, that's the reason why we cover our eyes, which means I do not say that it is Shabbat by the fact that I said the bracha. I said the bracha and I do this, I cover my eyes. When I open my hands, that's when I see the lights of the candle. So very clearly and simply, when you light the Shabbat, if you light the candles at that time when Shabbat, when it's the time of candle lighting, then that's it. Shabbat has been accepted now, even though there is still light outside. But if you light, let's say, the candles 1 hour before the time, means you have plenty of time yet. Or let me give you a better situation. Sometimes, even in the summer, for example, the husbands, they go to the synagogue when they pray much early the Friday night. And we are allowed to accept Shabbat 1 hour and 15 minutes before the appearance of the stars. As this opinion is brought in the Talmud of Rabbi Yehuda. And it says in the Talmud, Man de Avid ke Rabbi Yehuda Avid. Kaimallan Man de Avid. And we have a certain knowledge that whoever wants to follow Rabbi Yehuda is doing fine. And Rabbi Yehuda says you have to accept Shabbat 1 hour and 15 minutes before. So therefore, if it, many times today, because the day is very long, and we go much earlier to the synagogue, we finish the prayer of Shabbat when it is still day. Does that mean that you can go now and use your car? No, Shabbat has been already accepted. But what about the woman? She's going now, if she is lighting, if she's going to light the candles at the time of the candle lighting, then it means that she's going to light after her husband comes home. That's not feasible. You are home now, it's Shabbat. And now she's going to light, even though basically she can. So when does she accept Shabbat in that case? So the halacha says, when she hears the congregation, when she asks her husband, when do you say Baruchu et Hashem Amvorach? During, when you say Kaddish, the beginning of Kaddish. Or when do you say Bo'i Beshalom Ateret Ba'ala? When everybody gets up for Lecha Dodi, right? That's the time when we accept Shabbat. At that time she should say, this also is the time for me. And therefore, even though I am lighting before the time, for me it's already Shabbat, I cannot do anything. Except in emergency situations, when she is allowed to even go beyond that time, as long as she does not pass the candle lighting time, or even in worse situations, at least she should not go beyond sunset. Sunset is already forbidden completely to Chaz v'Shalom to desecrate Shabbat. There's much more to say about this. If you want, we could stay till tomorrow, that's okay. Yes, Uri?
I just have one short, simple question. When you said earlier about a person that's loose with their tongue, you said they're loose with their tongue.
Yes.
Is that applied to as much for women as well?
Oh boy, I was afraid of this question. I'll tell you something. See, women are much luckier than men. Thank God the camera is not on. It's on. Bo. Thank you. Okay. Leave it. Now I know how to say it at least. Whatever the man does, he has a partner. Everything that I said before has to do with the woman also. Only when I spoke about corruption of that part of the body, I meant when it is in connection with the woman also. That means people go with forbidden relations. You understand? If you meant a certain type of topic which we are not going to talk about, then it has to do with that, but the mind is working, one cannot do a certain type of sin on that part of the body without using his mind. If he doesn't think about her or something, he is not going to be able. So automatically they are connected. Physically she is not connected, and that's why she is luckier than men. She doesn't have the possibility of sinning, the sin that man is requested to show much more control than the woman. That's the reason why God gave the man more mind. Wait, hold it. What I mean is, our sages said, Nashim da'atam kalot, which people who do not know, they would explain it the wrong way, which means women have a mind that is light. So people think that it means that they are stupid. Oh no, because there is immediately another statement by our sages that immediately will contradict that. Our sages says, Gedola bina ba'isha yoter mi ba'ish. The woman is much more intelligent than the man. She has more mature intelligence than men. Did you watch? Why is it that we get married with, normally the woman is a little bit less aged than him? Why? Because only this way they can be equal. If he takes a woman who is his age, she's already like his mother. Why? Because her mind is much more developed than him. She is much more mature than him. But when it comes to certain things, such as holding, we are not talking about today's men today are worse than any time before. But I'm talking about men that are men, that can control themselves. The power of control of men is usually by nature more than the woman. The woman was given a lighter nature so that she will agree to marry quickly. Because if she has a stubborn mind, she will never want to marry. Our sages say that, and I trust in their words. There is much more to say about this. I'm not saying that this is the whole Torah about this. This question is practically a big chunk of the Torah. But the woman has something to do with this, although physically she doesn't have. And that's where she is lucky. Because a person who sins this sin, the way you probably are thinking, is a big sin and requires big repairs. And that's for more private sessions.